At first, it wasn't anything I could clearly identify. There was no single instant, no particular sentence that set it off. Instead, it felt like a quiet weight building over time. The kind you barely recognize until suddenly it becomes difficult to breathe. My wife Carol died in the spring of 2019. Pancreatic cancer, only 6 weeks between the diagnosis and the day she was gone. We had spent 41 years married, and I wish I could say I faced her passing with calm strength and dignity. The reality, though, was far less composed. I sat alone in our kitchen for 3 straight days, nibbling on crackers and staring at the clock as if it somehow owed me an answer. The house seemed impossibly large, not because it actually was. It was just a modest 3-bedroom place on Clover Street in Dayton, Ohio. The very house we bought back in 1994 when our son was only 7. But it felt so vast because she was no longer there to fill it. During that first month, my son made it a habit to call every evening. He lives in Columbus, roughly an hour and a half to the east, and he had married his wife 4 years before Carol passed away. At their wedding, I liked her well enough. She was polished and self-assured, the sort of woman who always seemed to know exactly which fork belonged to which course. My son had met her through work. She was in marketing and he worked in IT. Their relationship moved quickly. They dated for 8 months, got engaged, and were married within 2 years. Carol had a few quiet doubts about it, though she rarely voiced them. I remember telling her that every couple moves at their own rhythm. For a while, those evening calls from my son were a comfort. We talked about ordinary things, sports scores, the weather, what I'd managed to cook for dinner that night. Sometimes he'd ask if I was sleeping well. I always told him I was, even on the nights when that wasn't true. But sometime around October, about 5 months after Carol's death, the conversations began to shift. That's when he started bringing up the house. Not in a straightforward way, that's important to understand. It was never said outright. Instead, he'd drop little remarks like, "That's a lot of house for just one person, Dad." Or, "You know, the property values on Clover Street have really climbed lately." Later that year, near the end of it, he mentioned something else. He said, "A guy I work with sold his house and moved into a condo closer to his kids. Says it's the best choice he ever made." I told him I appreciated him thinking about me, but I was managing just fine where I was. After that, his wife began joining the evening calls too. She came across warmer than I had expected. She would ask about my health, telling me they worried about me being alone in such a quiet house. Then she mentioned that their place in Columbus had a finished basement, almost like a small apartment of its own. She described it as having a private entrance, a full bathroom, and even a small kitchenette. They were mostly using it for storage, she said, but clearing it out wouldn't take much effort. I told her that was generous of them to offer, though I wasn't ready to make any kind of decision yet. She quickly replied, "Of course, there's no pressure at all. They just wanted me to know the option was there." And I believed her. That's the part I keep circling back to in my mind. I truly believed she meant it. By the time March of 2020 arrived and everything suddenly shut down, I found myself alone in that house for weeks at a time. Occasionally, my neighbor Roy would stand across the street and give a wave. My sister lived out in Arizona, so there wasn't anyone nearby. I won't pretend the isolation didn't start to weigh on me, because it absolutely did. I was 67 years old, lying in a bed that still carried the faint scent of Carol's shampoo, heating up canned soup for dinner, and sitting in front of the news until 2 in the morning. Then one evening in April, my son called and said, "Dad, why don't you just come stay with us for a while? We'll get the basement ready for you, please." I told him I'd think about it. And I did think about it, for 3 full weeks. I even made a list, which Carol used to say was my way of delaying a decision instead of actually making one. I stared at that list for a long time. Eventually, I packed a small bag, got in the car, and drove to Columbus. That first summer there was honestly quite pleasant. I want to be fair about that part. On Saturdays, my son would fire up the grill in the backyard. His wife cooked a rosemary chicken that I still catch myself thinking about sometimes. They had 2 children then, a boy who was 9 and a girl who had just turned 6, and those grandchildren quickly became the brightest part of my life. The boy was crazy about baseball. The girl, on the other hand, had an intense fascination with dinosaurs. So enthusiastic it was both impressive and a little intimidating. I'd take the kids to the park, help them get through their homework, and on rainy afternoons we'd sit inside building strange little projects out of cardboard boxes and rolls of tape. The basement space was exactly as they'd described it: quiet, private, almost like having my own small apartment. I kept to my own schedule, and on Sunday afternoons my son and I would sit together watching football, something I hadn't done with him since before Carol passed. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was slowly fading out of the world. Then in August, my son brought up the Clover Street house. He said I should at least think about selling it. According to him, the housing market was in a strange place. Prices were climbing, and it was the kind of moment sellers wait for. Keeping an empty house, he pointed out, wasn't cheap once you counted property taxes, insurance, and general maintenance. He said the money from a sale could sit safely in my account, earning interest, and that realistically, I wasn't going back to Dayton to live again. The truth was, he wasn't wrong about any of it. I spent some time thinking it over. By October, I decided to list the place. It sold in just 11 days, and for far more than I'd originally paid. After the mortgage was paid off, the realtor took their fees, and the small repairs I'd done before putting it on the market were settled. I walked away with around $240,000. I deposited it straight into my savings account. That money was mine and Carol's, the result of an entire life we had built side by side. Things began to change, and I want to be exact about when. Around February of the following year, one evening after the kids had gone to bed, my son and his wife asked if we could sit down for a minute. They had that familiar kind of energy couples get when they've clearly practiced what they're about to say. They explained that they'd been looking at a larger home in a neighborhood with stronger schools. With the Columbus housing market the way it was, they said they were roughly $3,000 short of the down payment that would make them feel comfortable moving forward. My son made a point of saying they weren't asking me for anything. He said they simply believed in being open because we were family, and they didn't hide things from each other. But the way he glanced at me after saying that lingered in the air. I spent the next week thinking it over. I thought about my grandchildren and the schools my son had described just down the street from that new house. I thought about how much Carol would have wanted those kids to grow up somewhere steady and secure. And I thought about the $240,000 sitting quietly in my account, money that at that moment I wasn't really using for anything at all. In the end, I gave them $30,000. I made it clear from the start that it was a gift, not a loan, and I truly meant that. My son shook my hand firmly, and his wife wrapped me in a hug, telling me I was the most generous man she'd ever met. Not long after, they found a place in Westerville, a beautiful neighborhood with 4 bedrooms, a proper backyard, and even a finished attic. They moved in that May. The basement setup carried over without any trouble. In fact, my space in the new house was even better. It was a walkout unit with a small patio where I could sit outside in the mornings, drinking coffee and enjoying the quiet. And I want to be very clear about something. I contributed. I wasn't just living there taking up space. Twice a week I handled the grocery shopping. Good groceries, the kind that kept a full kitchen running. 3 afternoons a week I picked the kids up from school, because my daughter-in-law's hours had grown longer, and my son's commute could be unpredictable. I helped take care of the yard when it needed it. When the dishwasher broke in September, I didn't make a fuss about it. I simply called a repairman and paid the bill myself. When my grandson needed new cleats for baseball season, and then another pair later for fall soccer, I bought those too. I was present. I was involved. I was part of that household. My retirement income came from the years I'd spent working 3 decades as an operations manager for a logistics company. Between the pension I earned and my Social Security checks, I was bringing in around $3,100 each month. That money was mine, and I used it to cover my personal needs. Gas for the car, an occasional dinner out, a new shirt or jacket when the old ones wore thin, doctor appointments when they came up. I wasn't living there as a burden. Around November, my son mentioned in passing that the mortgage on their new house had turned out to be a little tighter than they had expected. Something about interest rates shifting. He didn't ask me for anything directly. He simply brought it up. The following week, his wife mentioned it again while we were having dinner. She added that the utilities for the new house were higher than what they'd paid at their old place. More square footage, she explained. especially when it came to the winter gas bills. Her tone was casual, almost offhand, but I noticed she kept her eyes on her plate while she talked. Not long after that, I started contributing $300 a month toward the utilities. It was my idea. I brought it up myself and told them I wanted to help out. My son said it wasn't necessary, but I insisted that I wanted to do it. He thanked me for it, and his wife gave me one of those polished smiles she always seemed to have ready. By February, the $300 had turned into $400 after I offered to take care of the cable and internet bill as well. After a while, my daughter-in-law began taking over the grocery shopping in March through a shared account. She set it up herself and explained that it would simply be more efficient. That way she could order everything in one go instead of making multiple trips to the store. On paper, it sounded reasonable enough. So each month I transferred $500 into that account to cover groceries. By April, when everything was added together, I was contributing close to $900 every month toward the household. And that wasn't even counting the school pickups, the yard work, the appliance repairs, or the money I spent on the grandchildren's activities. I believed we had an understanding. I believed I was pulling my weight and earning my place there. Then one afternoon in May, my son called me. Not from work, from upstairs, even though I was only about 40 feet away in the basement. I remember noticing that immediately. He asked if I had time to talk later that evening. The wording stuck with me the rest of the day. After dinner, we sat at the kitchen table. His wife took the chair across from me, and my son sat at the end between us. The kids were upstairs in their rooms. My daughter-in-law did most of the talking. She explained that the household expenses had grown quite a bit. Between the mortgage, the car payments, and the kids' activities, she said they were starting to feel stretched financially. She told me she'd run some numbers. Then she mentioned that the basement unit, if they ever chose to rent it out to someone on the open market, could easily bring in around $1,500 a month in the current Columbus rental market, maybe even $1,700 or $1,800. She quickly added that she wasn't saying that was what they wanted to do. She said she was only trying to be transparent. My son kept his eyes on the table. She added that she thought it would be fair, her exact word, if I contributed $1,000 a month for my space, on top of the groceries and utilities I was already covering. I paused for a moment, and then asked my son what he thought. He said he believed she had made some valid points. I want to tell you that I had a sharp, perfect reply ready. I want to say I stood up and delivered some kind of speech that set everything straight, but that's not what happened. Instead, I said I'd think about it. I went downstairs, sat on my little patio in the dark, and stared at the empty space around me while thinking about $30,000. 2 years of groceries and 4 years of showing up. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay awake, thinking about Carol and what she would have said. She probably would have summed it up in 2 precise sentences, and they would have been the right ones. I am not as concise as she was. After that night, I started keeping track. I began writing things down. Not for any particular reason at first, just to occupy myself amid the restlessness. But the numbers started to bring clarity. Over the 14 months since they had moved into the Westerville house, I had contributed substantially, both in cash and in services. Somewhere between $22,000 and $25,000 had gone directly to their household. On top of the $30,000 gift, I'd provided regular childcare 3 days a week, work that at any standard rate would have cost them another $8,000 to $10,000. I'd paid for repairs, new clothes, school supplies, sports fees, birthday presents, Christmas, even the backyard swing set I bought in August because the kids had asked for one. And now they were asking for $1,000 a month on top of all that. I called my sister in Arizona, Patricia, Carol's closest friend as well as my sister, which makes for a combination that rarely spares feelings. Listened for about 20 minutes without a word. Finally she said, "You know what they're doing, right?" I replied, "I thought I did." She said simply, "Don't ask permission for things that are already yours." I let another week go by. During that week, my daughter-in-law texted me twice. Friendly, normal messages, nothing about the previous conversation. One morning, my son brought me a cup of coffee and asked how I'd slept, and I said fine. It was almost as if the whole discussion hadn't even happened. Later, at breakfast, just the two of us, she brought it up again. My son was already at work that morning. She was calm and pleasant about it. She poured my coffee, sat down across from me, and said she wanted to revisit the discussion because she felt it might not have landed as intended. She emphasized that they genuinely appreciated everything I had been doing. Then she asked when I thought I might be able to start contributing the additional amount. I set my cup down and looked at her. I've given you $30,000. I contribute $400 a month toward utilities and internet. I give $500 a month for groceries. In the last 14 months, I've spent over $20,000 on this household. I pick up your children from school 3 days a week, every week, without fail. I do not owe you rent. She was silent for a moment. Then she said she understood I had done a lot, and that they were grateful, but circumstances had changed and they needed to approach things practically. I told her I was being practical too. She paused, then said they might need to revisit the living arrangement if we couldn't reach an agreement. She said it with that calm, measured tone people use when they've rehearsed something for weeks. That afternoon, I called Patricia again. She told me, "Where do you want to be in 6 months? Figure that out, and work backwards." It was simple, clear advice, and it stuck with me. That evening, I asked my son if we could have a conversation, just the two of us. He looked like he had been expecting it. We drove about 2 miles to a nearby diner, neutral ground, which somehow felt a little sad, and slid into a booth with coffee in front of us. I told him I loved him. I told him how much I'd enjoyed being close to the grandchildren, and that nothing could ever change that. And then I told him plainly that what had been asked of me wasn't fair. I went through all the numbers, every single one. My son is not a foolish man. He knew the figures. His discomfort was obvious, the kind that makes it clear he'd been aware for some time but had chosen not to speak up. He said his wife handled most of the finances. I told him I understood that, but it wasn't relevant. He added that she was under a lot of pressure. I said, "I'm 68 years old. I've been a widower for 3 years. I sold my home and gave you $30,000. I pick up your children from school 3 days a week. And if anyone here has been under pressure without complaint, I think we both know who that is." He didn't respond for a long while. He just stirred his coffee. He said, "I know, Dad," just 2 quiet words, and I believe he meant them. I told him I'd been weighing my options. I'd even spoken with a real estate agent on my own, without telling anyone, and looked at a few 2-bedroom condos in the area. I had enough from the Clover Street sale, even after everything, to buy something outright. No mortgage. Completely mine. I told him I thought that was probably the right move. He looked like he was about to argue, and then like he wasn't. He asked if I was angry. I thought about that for a moment, and told him no. Not angry in the way people usually mean it. I was clear. There's a difference. Anger is what hits you when you're surprised. I hadn't been surprised in a long while. As for my daughter-in-law, there wasn't much of a scene. She's too controlled for that. When I told them both together that I'd be moving into my own place in 8 weeks, she said she was sorry to hear it and hoped it wasn't due to any misunderstanding. I told her it wasn't a misunderstanding at all, and then I let the silence stretch. Those 8 weeks were strange, polite, and strange. She remained cordial, and my son was quieter than usual. The grandchildren didn't know anything was changing until about 2 weeks before I moved. That's when I sat them down and told them that Grandpa was getting his own place nearby. I framed it as exciting news. It was a nice condo in a complex with a pool after all. The boy immediately asked if they could swim there. I said, "Absolutely, anytime you want." I found a 2-bedroom condo in Dublin, about 12 minutes from their house. 2nd floor, south-facing, plenty of light. I paid for it outright and put the remaining money back in my account where it belonged. I moved in on a Thursday in late September. That first morning, I woke up in my own place. I made coffee in my own kitchen, sat at my own table, and read the paper for an hour without anyone needing anything from me. It felt like a privilege I'd forgotten I was allowed to have. The grandchildren came to swim that Saturday. My son brought them and stayed for a while. We sat by the pool in the October sun, watching the kids cannonball into the water, and it felt easy between us again. In a way it hadn't for months. He said, "This is a good place, Dad." I said I thought so too. He apologized for how complicated things had gotten. I told him, Things get complicated sometimes, and left it at that. Now I see the kids at least twice a week, sometimes 3. I still pick them up on Wednesdays. I offered because I wanted to, and we stopped for ice cream on the way home. The boy is obsessed with baseball statistics, which gives us a full 2 hours of conversation every Wednesday afternoon. The girl has moved from dinosaurs into marine biology, which she describes with the same intensity, and I am here for every word of it. My son texts me most days. We've had some harder conversations since the move, honest ones, the kind you can only have when nobody needs anything from each other. He's admitted that things moved in a direction he should have noticed sooner. I believe him. He's a good man who let someone else make decisions he should have been part of. I don't have a prescription for that situation. I've just decided it's not mine to fix. His wife is civil, polite. We will probably never be close, and I've made peace with that. She got what she needed, and I lost what I let go of, and now we've both recalibrated. There's nothing dramatic left to say. What I'll tell you, because I think it's the part that matters most, is this. I gave from love, and that part was right. What was wrong was believing that love required me to hollow myself out indefinitely, that there was no floor below which I was not expected to give more. I confused being generous with being available for whatever anyone needed, and I confused keeping the peace with actually having peace. I'm 68 years old. I live 12 minutes from my grandchildren. I have a second bedroom. I'm turning it into a little reading room. I have a patio where I drink my coffee in the morning, and I do not check my phone until I'm ready. I have money in an account with my name on it that is going to stay there. Carol would have said I took too long to get here. She would have been right. She usually was. If you've enjoyed this story and want more tales of family, struggle, and triumph, make sure to subscribe to our channel, A Father's Wrath, and follow along for the next chapter.